King Zarthu's face on the communication screen looked tired and worried as he spoke to his daughter. Lyra, I am relieved that you are alive, but the situation has become very complicated. The council is demanding answers, and some of them are questioning whether you can still serve as our cultural ambassador. Princess Lyra straightened up in her bed and looked directly at her father's image. Father, I was nearly killed for trying to build bridges between our people and the humans. If the council thinks that makes me unfit to serve, then they are the ones who have forgotten what is truly important. The king's expression softened slightly as he looked at his daughter. I know you believe in what you are doing, Lyra, but the political reality is that many of our people are afraid of change. They see your survival as proof that we are becoming too dependent on human assistance. Alex stepped into view of the communication screen and bowed respectfully to the king. Your Majesty, I understand the concerns of your people, but I hope you can see that cooperation between our species saved your daughter's life. That has to count for something. King Zarthul studied Alex's face for a long moment before responding. Dr. Carter, I am personally grateful for what you have done for my daughter. However, as a king, I must consider the welfare of all my people, and not just my own family. Princess Lyra looked at her father with determination in her eyes. Father, I want to investigate the attack on my life. I believe that if we can find out who was really behind it, we can prove that the real threat to our people comes from those who oppose cooperation, not from those who support it. The king shook his head with concern. Lyra, that would be too dangerous. The people who tried to kill you once will certainly try again if they think you are getting close to exposing them. Alex moved closer to the communication screen. Your Majesty, what if Princess Lyra did not investigate alone? What if she had help from someone who understands both human and Zephyrian systems? Commander Vextai stepped forward with interest. Dr. Carter, are you suggesting that you would help Princess Lyra investigate the attack? That could put you in even more danger than you are already in. Alex nodded without hesitation. I am willing to take that risk if it means we can find the truth and prevent more attacks. Princess Lyra and I have already proven that we can work together effectively. The king was quiet for several minutes as he considered the proposal. If you are going to investigate this matter, you will need to be very careful and very discreet. The people behind this attack have resources and influence in both governments. Princess Lyra felt excitement building in her chest. Father, are you giving us permission to investigate? King Zarthul sighed heavily. I am giving you permission to look into the matter quietly and carefully. But if I believe that your investigation is putting you in too much danger, I will order you to stop immediately. Alex felt a surge of hope as he realized that they were going to be able to work together to find the truth. Thank you, Your Majesty. We will be very careful, and we will keep you informed of everything we discover. The communication ended, and Princess Lyra looked at Alex with gratitude in her eyes. Dr. Carter, you are taking a huge risk by helping me with this investigation. Why are you willing to do this? Alex sat down beside her bed and looked at her. Seriously, Princess, someone tried to murder you because you believe in cooperation between our species. If we do not find out who was behind the attack, they will try again, and next time they might succeed. I cannot let that happen. Commander Vextai approached them with a datapad in his hands. If you are going to investigate the attack, you should start by looking at the security recordings from the gathering where Princess Lyra was poisoned. I have copies of everything that was recorded that day. Princess Lyra took the datapad and began scrolling through the files. I remember seeing several people at the gathering who seemed nervous or out of place. At the time, I thought they were just uncomfortable because they had never attended a political meeting before. Alex looked over her shoulder at the screen and saw recordings of the gathering from several different angles. Can you identify any of the people who seem suspicious to you? The princess pointed to a figure in the crowd who was standing near the back of the room. That man there. He was wearing traditional Zephyrian clothes, but something about his posture and the way he moved seemed wrong. He kept looking around like he was watching for something. Alex studied the image carefully. He does look like he is more interested. in watching the crowd than listening to your speech. Do you know who he is? Princess Lyra shook her head. I have never seen him before, but Commander Vextai might be able to identify him from the security databases. Commander Vextai took the datapad and ran the image through the ship's identification system. After a few minutes, he looked up with a concerned expression. This man is not in any of our databases. That means he was either using a false identity, or he is not a Zephyrian citizen. Alex felt his pulse quicken. If he is not a Zephyrian citizen, then he might be the human collaborator that your intelligence sources mentioned. Princess Lyra scrolled through more of the security recordings until she found another angle that showed the suspicious man more clearly. Look at this. Just before the attack began, he pulled out a small device and pressed something on it. Then, he immediately started moving toward the exit. Commander Vextai examined the image of the device. That looks like a remote activation unit. He may have been the one who released the toxin into the air ventilation system. Alex stood up and began pacing around the room as he thought about what they had discovered. If this man is a human collaborator, then he had to have help from someone inside the Zephyrian government. He would have needed access to the building and information about the security systems. Princess Lyra looked up from the datapad with excitement. Dr. Carter, you are right. And I think I know who might have helped him. There is a member of the Purity Council named Advisor Kefan who has been very vocal about his opposition to my work. Commander Vextai looked uncertain. Princess, that is a very serious accusation. Advisor Kefan is a high-ranking official with access to classified information. If he is involved in this conspiracy, it could reach the highest levels of government. Alex stopped pacing and looked at both of them. Then we need to be very careful about how we investigate him. If he is involved and he realizes that we suspect him, he might try to silence us permanently. Princess Lyra closed the datapad and looked at Alex with determination. We need to find out more about this human collaborator first. If we can identify him and prove that he was working with Zephyrian conspirators, we will have evidence that can expose the whole plot. Commander Vextai nodded in agreement. I can use my access to the security networks to trace where this man went after he left the gathering. If we can track his movements, we might be able to find out who he was working with. Alex felt a mixture of excitement and fear as he realized how dangerous their investigation was going to be. We are going to be investigating people who have already proven they are willing to commit murder to achieve their goals. We need to be prepared for the possibility that they will try to stop us. Princess Lyra stood up from her bed and walked over to a cabinet where she kept her personal belongings. Dr. Carter, I want you to have this. She handed him a small communication device. This will allow us to stay in contact even when we are on different ships. If either of us discovers something important, we can share it immediately. Alex took the device and clipped it to his uniform. Princess, we are about to embark on something that could change the relationship between our species forever. Are you ready for that kind of responsibility? Princess Lyra looked at him with fire in her eyes. I have been ready for this my whole life, Dr. Carter. The question is whether our people are ready for the truth about who their real enemies are. The deeper tunnels of the mining complex stretched into darkness like the throat of some enormous beast. Jake limped forward with Lisa's help, following Commander Davis and his men through passages that hadn't seen human feet in decades. Air was thick with dust and the metallic smell of old machinery. There should be a geothermal generator about half a kilometer ahead, Jake explained, his voice echoing off the tunnel walls. The miners use it to power their deep excavation equipment. If it's still functional, it might be able to recharge my pack properly. Davis nodded, but kept checking his motion scanner. The Korthik are still tracking us somehow. They're moving through the upper levels, and they seem to know exactly where we're going. Jake felt the pod pulse more rapidly in his pack, and a strange thought occurred to him. What if the offspring was somehow transmitting a signal? He had heard that some alien species could communicate across great distances using methods that human technology couldn't detect. Sir, One of Davis's men called out from ahead. I'm seeing movement in the tunnel behind us. Multiple contacts, closing fast. Davis cursed under his breath. How did they get down here so quickly? The answer came in the form of harsh quartet voices echoing from the darkness behind them. The enemy soldiers have found the tunnel entrance and were pursuing them with deadly determination. Jake realized that his presence was putting everyone in danger. You need to leave me here, Jake said, stopping in the middle of the tunnel. Whatever they're tracking, it's something I'm carrying. Take the others and find another way out. Not happening, Martinez, Davis replied firmly. We don't leave people behind. But Jake could see in the commander's eyes that he was thinking the same thing. The Korthik were closing in, and someone was going to have to make a choice. The pod in Jake's pack pulsed again, and this time he felt something strange, like a whisper in the back of his mind. The sensation was so unexpected that Jake stumbled, nearly falling despite Lisa's support. For just a moment, he saw something. That wasn't there. A vast blue sky filled with floating islands, and creatures with tentacle-like appendages swimming through the air like fish through water. Jake, Lisa said with concern, what's wrong? Before Jake could answer, the first Korthik energy blast lit up the tunnel behind them. The enemy soldiers had caught up, and they were firing to wound rather than kill. They definitely wanted to. Capture someone alive. Move! Davis shouted, and the group began running deeper into the complex. Jake tried to keep up, but his wounded legs finally gave out completely. He collapsed against the tunnel wall, gasping for breath as the others disappeared into the darkness ahead. The pod in his pack was pulsing so rapidly, now that it was creating its own light, casting strange shadows on the tunnel walls. Go, Jake told Lisa, who had stopped to help him. I'll slow them down. I'm not leaving you, Lisa replied, raising her rifle toward the approaching enemy forces. Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez suddenly appeared beside them, breathing hard from the run. I'll stay with Martinez, she said grimly. You catch up with the others and make sure they reach that generator. Lisa looked torn between her duty to the group and her loyalty to Jake. Finally, she nodded and pressed a medical kit into his hands. Don't you dare die on me, Martinez. As Lisa disappeared into the darkness, Jake and Maria took up defensive positions in a wider section of the tunnel. The Korthik voices were getting closer, and Jake could see the glow of their weapon lights reflecting off the tunnel walls. What are you really carrying in that pack? Maria asked, checking her ammunition. Jake hesitated, then decided she deserved to know. Princess Lyraveth's offspring. It's some kind of royal heir, and the Korthik want it badly enough to risk everything to capture it. Maria let out a low whistle. That explains a lot. No wonder they've been so persistent. The first Korthak soldiers appeared around the bend in the tunnel, their reptilian forms clearly visible in the glow of their weapons. They moved with the careful precision of troops who knew their target was trapped and wanted to take it alive. Surrender. The human Martinez. One of them called out in broken human language. Give us the royal spawn and you will be spared. Jake raised his rifle instead of answering. The pod in his pack was pulsing so rapidly now that it was almost vibrating, and the strange whispers in his mind were getting stronger. He could see more images now. Vast cities floating in alien skies. Creatures with luminescent skin swimming through what looked like liquid starlight. They're not just memories, Jake realized suddenly. The offspring is trying to communicate with me. The first exchange of gunfire echoed through the tunnel like thunder. Maria's aim was deadly accurate, and she managed to drop 2 Korthik soldiers before they could find proper cover. But there were too many of them, and Jake could see more approaching from behind. Martinez! Maria shouted over the noise of battle. Whatever that thing is doing to your head, don't let it distract you. But Jake was beginning to understand that the mental connection wasn't a distraction. The offspring was sharing its genetic memories with him, teaching him about its species and its importance. He could see now why the Korthik wanted it so badly. The Zalani royal bloodline carried knowledge that could change the course of the war. A Korthik energy blast struck the wall inches from Jake's head, showering him with fragments of rock. He returned fire, trying to ignore the growing intensity of the mental connection. The offspring was getting stronger, and its attempts to communicate were becoming more desperate. "The generator room," Jake said suddenly. "It's not just the power. Source, there's something else there, something the offspring needs." Maria gave him a concerned look. "Jake, you're not making sense." But Jake was starting to see the bigger picture. The princess hadn't chosen him randomly to be the offspring's guardian. The mental connection was proof that he was somehow compatible with their species in ways that other humans weren't. The offspring was trying to prepare him for something important. A new group of Cortex soldiers appeared, carrying heavier weapons and wearing more advanced armor. These weren't regular troops but elite forces, the kind used for the most critical missions. They were here to capture the offspring, and they weren't going to give up easily. "We need to move," Maria said, reloading her rifle. "They're bringing up heavy weapons." Jake struggled to his feet, supported by adrenaline and the strange energy that seemed to be flowing from the pod in his pack. The mental connection was so strong now that he could almost hear the offspring's thoughts directly. It was afraid, but not for itself. It was afraid for him. "There's a maintenance shaft about 50 meters ahead," Jake said, the knowledge coming from nowhere. "It leads directly to the generator room." Maria looked at him strangely. "How do you know that?" Jake couldn't explain that the offspring was somehow sharing the memories of every Zilani who had ever worked in this facility. Instead, he just started moving toward the shaft, guided by knowledge that wasn't his own. They reached the maintenance access just as the heavy weapons opened. Fire behind them. The tunnel filled with superheated energy that would have killed them instantly if they had been a few seconds slower. Jake pulled himself into the shaft with Maria right behind him, and together they began crawling toward what he hoped would be their salvation. The pod in his pack was glowing so brightly now that it was illuminating the shaft around them. Offspring was trying to tell him something important, something about the generator room and what they would find there. Jake just hoped they would live long enough to discover what it was. The power plant loomed ahead like a metal mountain against the alien sky. Jake could see sparks flying from damaged electrical lines and hear the hum of generators that were somehow still running despite the war raging around them. His legs felt like they were made of lead, and each step sent fresh waves of pain through his body. "Almost there," Lisa whispered, supporting more of his weight as they approached the facility's outer fence. "Just a few more meters." Jake nodded, not trusting his voice. The pod in his pack had been pulsing more frequently over the past hour, and he was starting to worry that something was wrong. The environmental readings were still within acceptable ranges, but barely. They had maybe 6 hours of power left. Before the system failed completely, they found a hole in the fence that had been torn open by artillery fire and squeezed through carefully. The power plant's main building was a massive structure, filled with alien technology that the human engineers had learned to operate during the early days of the occupation. Jake hoped that some of the human-compatible charging stations would still be functional. As they entered the building, Jake heard voices echoing from somewhere deeper inside. He and Lisa immediately took cover behind a large transformer unit, weapons ready. The voices were speaking in human language, which was both a relief and a concern. "Check the secondary generators," a familiar voice called out. "If we can get them online, we might be able to power the communications array." Jake recognized the voice immediately. It was Commander Kyle Davis, the leader of the human forces in this sector. But what was he doing here instead of at the command post? "Commander," Jake called out softly, not wanting to startle armed soldiers. In a combat zone, the voices stopped immediately, and Jake heard the sound of weapons being readied. "Identify yourself," Davis's voice commanded. "Sergeant Jake Martinez, 3rd Marine Regiment," Jake replied. "I have Corporal Carter with me." Several figures emerged from behind the machinery, and Jake was relieved to see Commander Davis along with 2 other soldiers he recognized. But the relief faded when he saw the grim expressions on their faces. "Martinez!" Davis said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "We thought you were dead. What happened to Princess Lyra Veth?" Jake felt the weight of the pod in his pack and chose his words carefully. "She didn't make it, sir. The ambush was too well coordinated. They were waiting for us." Davis nodded grimly. "The whole sector is compromised. We've been in full retreat for the past 8 hours. The Korthik have pushed us back to the evacuation zone, and even that's not secure anymore. What about the refugee camps?" Lisa asked. "Overrun 6 hours ago," one of the other soldiers replied. "We managed to get most of the civilians out, but the Korthik are hunting down anyone who's left behind." Jake processed this information while trying to figure out how to recharge his pack without revealing what he was carrying. The pod was too important to risk in the chaos of a general retreat. But he couldn't maintain its life support systems much longer. "Sir," Jake said carefully, "my pack's power system was damaged in the ambush. Do you know if there are any charging stations still working in here?" Davis pointed toward the back of the building. "There's a maintenance area with some human-compatible equipment, but Martinez, we can't stay here long. The Korthik know we're in this area, and they're bringing up heavy weapons." Jake and Lisa made their way to the maintenance area while the others continued working on the generators. The charging station was old but functional, and Jake was able to connect his pack's power system to it. The readings showed that it would take at least 2 hours to fully recharge, time they might not have. While the pack was charging, Jake took the opportunity to examine the pod more closely. The crystalline shell seemed to be growing thicker, and the movement inside had become more pronounced. He could make out what looked like limbs and possibly a head, though it was hard to tell with the alien anatomy. "Jake," Lisa said quietly, "look at this." She was pointing at her tactical display, which showed a map of the surrounding area. Red dots indicated enemy positions, and there were a lot of them. The Korthik had surrounded the power plant with at least 3 full companies of troops. "They're not just hunting us," Lisa realized. "They're hunting something specific." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. The enemy forces were positioned in a perfect search pattern, the kind used when looking for a high-value target. They knew about the pod, and they were determined to capture it. "We need to move," Jake said, checking his pack's charge level. It was only at 30%, but it would have to do. "They're closing in." Before Lisa could respond, the sound of explosions echoed through the building. The lights flickered, and Jake could hear Commander Davis shouting orders to his men. The Korthik assault had begun. "Martinez!" "Carter!" Davis's voice called out. "We're moving out the back. Stay with the group." Jake grabbed his pack and followed Lisa toward the rear exit. The pod's environmental systems were running on partial power, which would give them maybe 12 hours before failure. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than nothing. They reached the exit just as the first Korthik soldiers breached the main entrance. Jake could hear their harsh voices and the distinctive sound of their energy weapons charging up. Davis and his men were already outside, taking up defensive positions behind some concrete barriers. "There's a drainage tunnel about 50 meters north," Davis told them. "It leads to the old mining complex. We can regroup there and figure out our next move." The group moved quickly across the open ground, with Jake struggling to keep up despite Lisa's support. His legs were getting worse, and he was starting to feel dizzy from blood loss. The pod in his pack continued to pulse, and Jake found himself wondering if it could somehow sense the danger they were in. They reached the tunnel entrance just as Korthik energy blasts began lighting up the area behind them. The tunnel was narrow and dark, barely wide enough for a human to crawl through. Jake realized that his injured legs were going to make this journey extremely difficult. "I'll go first," Davis said, disappearing into the tunnel. "Carter, you help. Martinez, everyone else, watch our backs." The tunnel seemed to go on forever. Jake's world became a nightmare of pain and claustrophobia as he dragged himself forward meter by meter. The pod in his pack felt like it was getting heavier, and he started to worry that the environmental systems weren't functioning properly in the confined space. After what felt like hours, they finally emerged into a large underground chamber. The old mining complex had been abandoned for years, but it provided good cover and multiple escape routes. Jake collapsed against the wall, exhausted and barely conscious. "We can't stay here long," Davis said, checking his tactical display. "The Korthik will figure out where we went eventually." "Sir," one of the soldiers said, "we're getting reports that the evacuation point has been completely overrun. Command is trying to establish a new extraction zone, but it's going to be at least 24 hours. Jake checked his pack's power levels and felt his heart sink. Even with the partial charge, the environmental systems would fail long before they could reach a new evacuation point. The pod needed more power, and Jake was running out of options. "There might be another way," Jake said quietly. "But it's going to be dangerous." Davis looked at him with interest. "What do you have in mind?" Jake thought about the mining complex's layout and the industrial equipment that might still be functional. It was a desperate plan, but it might be their only chance to keep the pod alive until they could reach safety. "We need to go deeper," Jake said. "There's something down here that might help us." Jake's eyes opened slowly, his head pounding like someone had hit it with a hammer. The ceiling above him was cracked and stained, and he could hear the distant sound of weapons fire echoing through the building. He tried to sit up and immediately regretted it as pain shot through his entire body. "Easy there, Sergeant," a familiar voice said from somewhere to his left. "You've been out for about 6 hours. Jake turned his head carefully and saw Corporal Lisa Carter kneeling beside a makeshift medical station. Her uniform was torn and bloody, and her face was streaked with dirt and exhaustion. She had been the patrol's medic, and apparently she had survived the ambush too. "Lisa," Jake's voice came out as a croak. "Where are we?" "Old hospital building about 2 clicks from where we got hit," Lisa replied while checking his bandages. "I managed to drag you here after the Korthik pulled back. Your legs took some serious shrapnel damage, but you'll live if we can get you proper medical attention." Jake suddenly remembered the crystalline pod that Princess Lyraveth had given him. He looked around frantically until he spotted his tactical pack sitting nearby. The pack's environmental controls were still running, their soft blue lights indicating that everything was functioning normally. "The princess," Jake said, struggling to sit up despite the pain. "What happened to her?" Lisa's face grew dark. "She didn't make it, Jake. I'm sorry. The blast was too much for her." Jake felt a heavy weight settle in his chest, but he forced himself to focus on his mission. Princess Lyraveth was gone, but her offspring was still alive, and he had made a promise. He reached for his pack and carefully opened the special compartment where the pod was stored. The crystalline shell was still pulsing with that inner light, and Jake could see more movement inside it now. Whatever was growing in there seemed to be developing rapidly. The pack sensors showed that the temperature and humidity were within acceptable ranges, but Jake noticed that the readings had changed since the ambush. "What is that thing?" Lisa asked, staring at the pod with wide eyes. "Princess Lyraveth's offspring," Jake explained. "She made me promise to protect it. It's apparently some kind of royal heir." Lisa let out a low whistle. "That explains why the Korthik were so determined to capture rather than kill. They must know about it somehow." Jake carefully secured the pod back in his pack and checked the environmental controls again. The system was designed to maintain perfect conditions for Zilani biological materials, but it was also extremely power-hungry. His pack's battery would only last another 18 hours at most. "We need to get to the evacuation point," Jake said, trying to stand up. His legs almost gave out immediately, and Lisa had to catch him to prevent him from falling. "Jake, you can barely walk," Lisa said firmly. "Those wounds need proper treatment, and you've lost a lot of blood." "I don't have a choice," Jake replied. "This thing needs specific conditions to survive, and my pack won't last much longer. How far are we from the extraction zone?" Lisa consulted her tactical display. about 30 kilometers northeast. But that's all enemy territory now. The Korthik have been pushing our lines back all day. Jake looked at his pack's power readings again. Even if they could somehow travel 30 kilometers in his condition, the environmental system would fail long before they reached safety. He needed to find another solution. Is there any way to recharge the pack? He asked. Maybe, Lisa said, thoughtfully, if we can find a power source that's compatible with our equipment. But Jake, even if we solve that problem, how are we going to get through 30 kilometers of enemy forces? Jake studied the tactical map on his display. The route to the evacuation point led through the industrial district, where the Korthik had established several forward bases. Going around would add another 20 kilometers to their journey, which was impossible given their limited supplies and his injuries. We'll have to go through, he decided, moving at night, staying off the main roads, avoiding their patrols. Lisa looked at him as if he had lost his mind. Jake, you can barely stand up. How are you going to sneak through enemy territory? Before Jake could answer, they heard the sound of vehicles approaching outside. Both soldiers immediately went silent, grabbing their weapons and moving to defensive positions near the windows. Through the cracked glass, Jake could see 3 Korthik transport vehicles stopping in the street below. The enemy soldiers that emerged were heavily armed and moved with the methodical precision of a search team. Their reptilian faces were hidden behind combat masks, but Jake could see the intelligence in their movements as they began to systematically search the surrounding buildings. They're hunting for us, Lisa whispered. They know we're in this area. Jake watched as the Korthik soldiers split into groups and began entering the buildings on either side of the street. It would only be a matter of time before they reached the hospital. He and Lisa needed to move, but Jake wasn't sure his legs would carry him very far. Help me up, he said quietly. Lisa supported him as he stood, and together they gathered their essential equipment. Jake's pack felt heavier than usual, but he knew that was probably just the effect of his injuries. The pod inside continued to pulse with its soft light, and Jake found himself wondering what kind of creature would emerge from it. They made their way carefully through the hospital's corridors, avoiding the areas where the floor had collapsed or where debris blocked their path. Jake's legs were screaming with pain, but he forced himself to keep moving. The princess had died to protect this offspring, and he wasn't going to let her sacrifice be meaningless. When they reached the hospital's rear exit, Jake could see a narrow alley that led toward the industrial district. The route would take them directly into enemy territory, but it was their only option. He checked his pack's power levels one more time and saw that they had dropped to 16 hours. Listen, Jake said to Lisa, you don't have to come with me. This isn't your mission. Lisa gave him a look that could have melted armor. Sergeant, with respect, shut up. We're in this together. They slipped out of the hospital and into the alley just as the first Korthik search team entered the building behind them. Jake could hear their harsh voices echoing through the empty corridors as they began their room-by-room search. The alley was narrow and filled with debris from the constant bombardment. Jake had to lean heavily on Lisa as they picked their way through the rubble, trying to make as little noise as possible. Every step sent waves of pain through his wounded legs, but he gritted his teeth and kept moving. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, they reached the end of the alley. Beyond it lay the industrial district, a maze of factories and warehouses that stretched toward the horizon. Smoke rose from several fires, and Jake could see the lights of Korthik patrol vehicles moving between the buildings. There, Lisa pointed to a large factory complex about 2 kilometers away. If we can reach that power plant, we might be able to recharge your pack. Jake nodded, though he wasn't sure he could make it that far. The pod in his pack pulsed more rapidly now, and he wondered if it could somehow sense his distress. The thought seemed crazy, but he had learned not to underestimate alien biology. They began their journey across the industrial wasteland, moving from cover to cover and avoiding the main roads where Korthik patrols were most active. Jake's world had narrowed to the next piece of cover, the next careful step, the next breath. The pain was becoming a constant companion, but he refused to give up. The offspring was counting on him, and Jake Martinez had never failed a mission in his life. He wasn't going to start now. The morning air on Kepler 442b felt thick and heavy as Sergeant Jake Martinez checked his rifle for the third time. The alien sun cast strange purple shadows across the broken city streets where human and Zilani forces have been fighting the Korthik invaders for 2 months now. Jake wiped sweat from his forehead and looked at the tall, graceful figure walking beside him. Princess Lyraveth moved with the fluid grace that all Zilani possessed, her pale blue skin seeming to shimmer in the alien sunlight. Her large, dark eyes constantly scanned the ruined buildings around them as she spoke in her musical voice to the other members of their patrol. Jake had been assigned to her personal guard 3 weeks ago, and he still felt nervous around royalty, even alien. Royalty. Sergeant Martinez, the princess called softly, using the human language she had learned during the alliance talks. Your thoughts seem troubled today. Jake turned to face her, noting how her silver hair caught the light. Just staying alert. Your Highness, these streets have been too quiet lately. The princess smiled, a gesture that looked almost human despite her alien features. You may call me Lyraveth when we are on patrol. We are soldiers together here, not in the royal court. There. Patrol consisted of 8 beings total, 4 humans from the Terran Defense Corps and 4 Zilani Royal Guards. They were checking the old residential districts for any remaining civilians who might need evacuation before the next planned assault on Korthik positions. The enemy had been pushing hard toward the refugee camps, and every day brought new reports of their brutal treatment of prisoners. Lieutenant Alex Cooper, the human patrol leader, raised his hand to signal a halt. Movement ahead, he whispered into his comm unit. 2 blocks north, near the old marketplace. Jake raised his rifle and moved closer to Princess Lyraveth. She carried her own weapon, a strange energy rifle that hummed softly when active. But Jake's orders were clear. Protect the princess at all costs. The alliance with the Zilani had been crucial in the war against the Korthik, and losing a member of their royal family would be a disaster for both species. The patrol moved forward, carefully, using the rubble and destroyed vehicles for cover. Jake could hear his own heartbeat in his ears as they approached the marketplace. The silence felt wrong, like the calm before a storm. Even the alien birds that usually filled the air with their strange songs had gone quiet. Princess Lyraveth suddenly stopped, her hand reaching out to touch Jake's arm. Her touch was warm, almost electric. Something is not right, she whispered, her large eyes widening with concern. I can sense danger nearby. Jake had learned to trust Zilani intuition. During his time with the Alliance forces, their species had evolved with heightened senses that often detected threats before human technology could. He immediately activated his comm unit to warn the others. All units, possible. The world exploded around them. The Korthik ambush came from 3 directions at once. Energy blasts tore through the air where the patrol had been standing moments before. Jake threw himself forward, tackling Princess Lyraveth to the ground behind an overturned transport vehicle just as a massive explosion rocked the street behind him. Ambush! Ambush! Lieutenant Cooper's voice crackled through the comm as gunfire erupted from the surrounding buildings. The distinctive red energy blasts of Korthik weapons lit up the air like deadly fireworks. Jake rolled off the princess and brought his rifle up, returning fire at the muzzle flashes he could see in the windows above. The Korthik were reptilian creatures with thick, armored skin and a cruel intelligence that made them dangerous opponents. They had been conquering worlds across this sector for decades, and their arrival at Kepler 442b had forced humans and Zilani to work together for the first time in history. Your Highness, we need to move, Jake shouted over the sound of battle. The transport won't provide cover for long. Princess Lyraveth nodded, her own weapon now active and humming with power. She fired several shots at a group of Korthik soldiers trying to flank their position, her aim deadly accurate. Jake felt a moment of admiration for her skill before focusing on their tactical situation. The patrol was pinned down in the middle of the marketplace with enemies on 3 sides. Jake could see Lieutenant Cooper and 2 other humans taking cover behind a destroyed fountain, while the Zilani guards had found positions among the ruined market stalls. The enemy had planned this ambush well, using the perfect killing ground to trap them. "Martinez!" Cooper's voice came through the comm. "We need to fall back to the extraction point. Can you get the princess out of there?" Jake looked at the distance. They would need to cover. It was at least 200 meters of open ground with minimal cover. The Korthik would cut them down before they made it halfway. He was about to respond when he noticed something that made his blood run cold. 3 Korthik soldiers were setting up a heavy weapon on the roof of a building directly across from their position. The weapon looked like some kind of energy cannon, much larger than their standard rifles. If they got that thing operational, it would tear through their cover like paper. "Princess, we have a problem," Jake said, pointing toward the roof. "That weapon will finish us all." Princess Lyrith looked where he was pointing, and her face went pale. "It is a plasma destructor," she said quietly. "My people have seen them before. It will destroy everything in a wide area." Jake made a decision that would change everything. Without thinking about the consequences, he grabbed a thermal grenade from his belt and prepared to make a run for the building. If he could get close enough, maybe he could bring down that weapon before it fired. "What are you doing?" Princess Lyriveth grabbed his arm. "My job," Jake replied simply. "Protecting you." But before he could move, the plasma destructor fired. Blast was enormous, a ball of superheated energy that struck the ground directly between Jake and the princess. The explosion threw them both backward, and Jake felt searing pain as shrapnel tore through his legs and torso. He hit the ground hard, his vision blurring as he struggled to stay conscious. Through the ringing in his ears, he heard Princess Lyriveth crying out in pain. Jake forced himself to turn his head and saw her lying several meters away, her silver hair now stained with dark blue blood. A large piece of metal had pierced her chest, and she was struggling to breathe. "Princess!" Jake crawled toward her, ignoring the pain in his wounded legs. The battle continued around them, but everything seemed muted and distant. When he reached her side, Princess Lyriveth looked up at him with eyes that were already beginning to dim. "Jake," she whispered, using his first name for the first time. "I am dying." "No," Jake said firmly, applying pressure to her wound. "You're going to be fine. We'll get you to the medical station." But even as he spoke, Jake could see that her injuries were too severe. The princess knew it too, because she reached into a small pouch at her waist and pulled out something that made Jake's breath catch. It was a crystalline pod, about the size of a human fist, that seemed to pulse with its own inner light. The surface was smooth and warm to the touch, and Jake could see something moving inside it. "My offspring," Princess Lyriveth said weakly, "the future of my family line. By the ancient laws of my people, I transfer guardianship to you, Jake. Martinez, you must protect this life as you have protected mine." Jake stared at the pod in amazement. He had heard that Zilani reproduction was different from humans, but he had never imagined something like this. The responsibility she was placing on him was enormous. "I don't know how," he admitted. "You will learn," the princess said, her voice growing fainter. "The bond is now formed. You are its guardian until it comes of age. Promise me." Jake looked into her dying eyes and saw not just a princess, but a mother desperate to save her child. "I promise." Princess Lyriveth smiled one last time, and then she was gone.